Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, Nostalgia Catholic, with yet another Isaac Asimov short story review. This time I'm looking at right here, at least it gets the story name and Isaac Asimov's name on there. It's called Ideas Die Hard by Isaac Asimov, and therefore it is also correspondingly listed in the table of contents under novelettes. Ideas Die Hard by Isaac Asimov, page 126. So we go to page 126, and we have it here. This is inside Galaxy Science Fiction, the October 1957 edition. So we have, there we go, Ideas Die Hard by Isaac Asimov, a blurb, an illustration. Let me read that stuff. It's hard to read here. Okay. The technical problems had been solved long ago, but now the ultimate question had to be answered. Could men be sent to do man's job? Illustrated by Dick Francis. So we've got these two guys. They're in a very confined space because this is the idea is to send a rocket ship to the moon and have a couple people in it, and they'll at least having company of each other. This would keep them from going too much crazy. I don't know. I mean, it's a way they're kind of like almost in a womb, I guess. That's why that's there for this drawing. So they're in this very tight space together, and they watch the Earth get further and further away. They look back on it, and they see this big blue, green, white, fuzzy ball that's supposed to be planet Earth. And they look forward and they see the moon. And another little scene from them. They've kind of got these couches where they have to sit and just be there for long enough to go to the moon and back, basically. Their planned trip is, when you think about it, not all that different from the actual path taken by Apollo 13, because they went around the back of the moon, came back. That was it. No landing, no orbiting, just go around to the other side of the moon, take a look at the backside. That should be interesting. Come around and come back home and tell everybody what you saw. I don't know why they didn't think about taking pictures, but okay, whatever. In fact, that could have probably changed the story a bit. At one point, one of the guys, well, you've got these two guys. One of them's named Oldbury, and the other one's called Davis. And they definitely have some very different personalities. At one point, Davis is really pissing off Oldbury so much that he punches him. There's another illustration of that. Wow. So it comes with some rather nice artwork. And there's speculations as they talk to each other. They're all like, how do you know the world is round? Well, we see it there in our viewfinder when we look back from where we're coming from, right? Well, I don't know. You could say that was just a big flat disc shaped like that. And like, well, except we all know, and they talk about why we would know this. And then it's like, well, okay, how do we know that the Earth isn't flat? Well, how do we know that the moon is really, something like that too? Well, we talk about seeing the kind of shadows that these orbiting objects will cast on each other and things like that. And then they also see, what else? They ask about, well, is the Earth, only 6,000 years old versus is it millions of years old? And they're like, well, could the world have been just created 6,000 years ago with all the appearance of having been older? And it's like, how do you know that wasn't the case? I mean, couldn't that have been done? Well, yeah, it could have been done. I mean, it wouldn't physically possible, Although they don't bring this up, but I kind of realized by that logic, you could also say, well, how do we know that the world as we know it wasn't created 16 minutes ago and everything about it complete with all of our false memories of everything having occurred before that time. You know, I mean, it's the same thing. You really wouldn't know. So it's not really a very, you know, useful speculation, but it's a known speculation that some people have made. And, well, they get to the moon, and apparently there'd been some probes sent to the moon, and for whatever reason, before the probes could get even just to the other side of the moon, something goes wrong, they go astray, they fall silent. I don't know, but it's not very clear. But apparently we don't get the answers. What happened with the moon? So these people are now about to go around the back side of the moon, and sure enough, all the levers and controls and everything start going crazy, but they've been trained in these things. They know what to do, and so they do it, and they're still alive and well, and now they're circling around the back of the moon, and they're getting the shock of their life. Because, okay, the story was written and published in 1957. Little did he realize that the time would come so terribly soon that a probe, the Lunik 3 to be precise, from Russia, would actually go around the back side of the moon, take pictures, and send them back. Now, the pictures were very crude, but you could even tell from that almost the whole back side of the moon was all just craters. All those seas areas, the dark gray areas that dominate the side of the moon we see here from Earth, barely even exist. A little tiny spot in one small area, but other than that, it's like it's all just bright craters, like the more bright craterly parts of the moon, part of the moon we always see from Earth, which is a total surprise. No one saw that coming. There had been some story referred to in this in very vague and general ways that maybe the Martians had built some sort of a colony on the other side of the moon, and from there they would observe us. And they said, well, how would you observe us through, 2,000 miles thick of lunar rock and so forth? And then he starts to dive into the story, and then it gets cut off before he can say enough of it in case the story exists, which it probably does. It's a pretty straightforward, reasonable story. So it probably exists as some science fiction story somewhere. So the reference is very brief and vague, paraphrasing. So it's totally within, Isaac did nothing wrong in quoting it that way without giving any of it away as far as anything that could be construed as a spoiler. So, okay. Well, what did they see? The guys go, what did he see on the other side of the moon? He saw the whole construction, like scaffolding and things, like pieces of wood, and it's like it's all fake. Like when you build something where you're doing a film that's supposed to happen in a town, and you have all these houses going along the sides of the street, and they're just fronts of houses. There's nothing behind. There's nothing inside because they're just fronts of the houses. That's all you need. And that's what you had here. You had just, looked like that's what the back of the moon was. Well, that was another interesting idea. Although he did have this other thing, that little ending of the story, that kind of explains that outcome. But the thing about it is, because the back of the moon was seen so very soon after this story had made its appearance in Galaxy, it took until this 1983 or so collection, 1983 collection, the Winds of Change and Other Stories, before it ever got collected anywhere, at least into one of his main stories. So you have, now he has a little bit of a thing on here, Ideas Die Hard introduction. He mentions in the 1950s, the magazine at the leading edge of the field was Galaxy Science Fiction, which was edited by Horace L. Gold. So he actually put Galaxy ahead of Astounding Science Fiction at that point. This probably had something to do with Astounding Science Fiction. I mean, he had a lot of fondness and sentimentality for John Campbell, who helped him get his start as an author. But John Campbell was getting all into Dianetics, pseudoscience, and stuff like that, which was just he couldn't take very much of it. He'd throw him an article or two for old time's sake, or serialize a novel here and there, all for old time's sake. But he didn't really. For him, now the real cream of the crop was Galaxy. But there was a catch to all this, and he continues here. Gold was, however, an acerbic individual, and his rejections were cruel. I finally reached the point where I felt I could not face them, and I stopped writing for him. In March 1957, however, he asked me to try him and promised to reject me, if he had to, with reasonable politeness. I thought I would try, therefore, since, except for his rejections, I liked Horace. Ideas Die Hard was the result, and he didn't reject it at all. It was published in the October 1957 Galaxy. A quarter century has passed. Why has this story not appeared in any of my collections? It isn't a bad story, in my opinion. However, it is out of date. I'm usually careful to write my stories so that it is very difficult for them to get in the way of developing science. But this time I muffed it. In 1957, everyone was talking about going to the moon, but no one had as yet even put a satellite into orbit. 1957, I mean, we're looking at Sputnik will go up later that year, but it hasn't yet. And there's no telling when that would ever actually happen or anything like it. So everyone was talking about this. So I felt safe in writing a story about going to the moon. I assumed that events would not overtake me very quickly, but they did. In a very few years, not only were satellites orbiting the Earth, but a lunar probe had gotten around the other side of the moon and photographed it. That would be Luna 3. It seems to me now, though, that I can live with being out of date. I can use it as an educational experience. Here is an example of what seemed like a clever idea to me in 1957, and you can see for yourself how science can race ahead of even a cultivated imagination. So, point being, just like another story a few stories back about Everest, climbing Mount Everest. He writes a story about how we'd never get to the top of Mount Everest because of, that's the story of his fiction. And then, even before the thing sees print, Edmund Hillary climbs to the very tippy top of Mount Everest for the first time any human being had ever been up there. So, well, what do you do, huh? What do you do? So, but it's kind of interesting to watch him talk about all these sort of things of, how do we know what we know, scientifically speaking? And I don't know, I mean, it's an interesting discussion between the two guys. It kind of ends rather miserably with poor Davis being too paranoid to talk, and the other, Oldbury, well, he's kind of okay, but it's been kind of the whole thing's been a shock for him because he saw the backside of the moon and it was just like woodwork and scaffolding and, whatever back there just to hold up what was essentially a canvas. And Davis would almost never say anything except maybe he'd look at the moon and say, canvas, So it ends with that. But there is another little part of the story. I won't spoil that. It's a good little story, and I actually do recommend reading it. So, and since it is in the Winds of Change, it is finally readily obtainable. Anyway, that's Ideas Die Hard, because you get some idea in your head, and it can be very hard to dislodge it. It's like a mental habit. You're used to thinking of, say, the Earth is flat, or the Earth doesn't move, but the rest of the whole universe spins around it, or the Earth is only 6,000 umpity-ump years old, and so on. You kind of get used to thinking like these things. It becomes like a mental habit, and then, these habits kind of get to the point where they not only can't they be questioned, they just can't even be changed. And that can often make it very difficult for somebody to find out what's going on because you can't look at evidence anymore. You're just trying to prove something you already believe. So that's a genuine concern. It's like I say, it's a really interesting and relevant little story. Well, thanks for listening.